Thank you very much. As you can see, I'm not actually a very technical person, and my wife will know that. I can't actually hang a picture on the wall without creating a big hole, and then the picture is also crooked. So thank you very much. Before we start, I really want to thank Pastor Cohen for opening up this place for today's, I guess it's a very timely topic for us to come together to share. And it is very generous of FGA and Pastor Cohen to open up this place, and I really, really appreciate that. I also appreciate very much Peter Tan, my brother, who has kindly working behind the scene to bring this into fruition. What came about is that I wrote the book, and then I rang up Peter and say, "Hey Peter, can you read through the book? And if it is, or read through the manuscript, and if it agrees with you in your spirit, can you give me an endorsement?" And he gave the endorsement. And after the book was published, it was only published probably about 6 weeks ago, I rang him up and I say, "Oh, look, I think the Lord is leading me to have this conviction that I should actually bring the book back to Malaysia and Singapore." I was actually born in Penang. I was a Penang boy, and I guess still very much a Penang boy at heart. It is always nice to come back to Penang. Penang is sort of very beautiful and in a way a bit chaotic. And I always say that Penang is kind of a bit chaotically beautiful and beautifully chaotic. And you can't find another place like that. I don't wish that Penang is like Singapore. It's a bit too pristine and without blemished. And so Penang is a very nice place for me to come back to. So without further ado, I just want to introduce today the topic that we are going to talk about, and that is mental health in search of spirituality. I'm going to share with you 3 talks. For the next 60 minutes or so, I'm just going to talk about the introduction, and then after that, we would go a bit more into examining the whole issues about fear and anxiety and depression. And last but not least, for the last hour, I would want to share a bit with you about Christian spirituality. I just want to talk a bit about the birth of the book. And I am actually a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I spent my formative year in Penang, part of the formative year in Penang. And after that, the family actually went to Australia, Sydney. So it was there that I completed my high school and met my wife, Gracia, who is also a medical practitioner. And we spent a great deal of our courting days in the medical library. So it is very cheap for me to go out with a beautiful young lady and just spend time studying and having a dinner at McDonald's. But anyway, so that's where I spent my time and study in medicine, and after that specialized in psychiatry and subspecialized in child and adolescent psychiatry. And over the last many years of practice as a child, adolescent, and family psychiatrist, I have come to the conclusion that really, as Christians, and there's a lot more that we can actually offer to our patients rather than a straightforward medical psychiatric model. Now, that is not to say that I've come here today saying that everything that I've learned in terms of medicine and psychiatry doesn't work, but I think the Lord has led me into more of an integrative model of integrating Christian spirituality into psychiatry. And this is what I hope within the shortness of 3 hours that I can actually share with you all. And as our brother Peter has said, My wife and I, we actually do prayer ministry together. We were both trained in LL, and we were associate teachers with the LL Sydney, and we were also instrumental with the setup of LL in the Far East and in the early days of LL Penang. Again, our brother Peter Tan has generously shared with us, gave Gracie and I the privilege of sharing together in the teaching. So I really, really appreciate that. And I think, as Peter has said, there's a lot of concordance or coming together of our ministry. And it is nice to know that a lot of times where we have begun, the Lord always brings us back. The last time that we were here teaching in terms of LL was probably about 10 years ago. So we are both married with two beautiful adult children. My son, James, actually is a full-time minister as well, and he's actually church planting next year in roundabout where we live, or in the North Shore. And we have three very beautiful granddaughters. So as you can imagine, that actually keeps me busy. And in a way, my life is surrounded with beautiful women or ladies or girls or whatever. So I have a lot of feminine input and family influence. So now what we're going to share is, sorry, I'll press what I want to share today. I get a bit confused, I'm sorry, with the what I see on the laptop and the pressing. So what I want to share today is three things, and this will be the three sessions. The increase in mental health problems. I just want to share with us a bit about why there is an increase in mental health problems, and then go on to talk about fear, anxiety, and depression, and the role of Christian spirituality in mental health. So what I'm trying to do is actually to compress into 3 hours many hours of observation and study. And I hope that out of today, it is just going to whet your appetite a bit for you to go on. But the other thing that I want to also arouse the interest, after I've written the book, I get the impression that the Lord actually wants me to take back what I've written to the church. And I think it is time that the church actually reclaim our place in terms of helping people with mental health problems. Before the advent of psychology and psychiatry, a lot of times when people have mental health issues, they actually go to the church, because church is the one place where you have the good news, and church is the one place where you can find love and acceptance, and church is the one place where you can find healing. But I think, like a lot of things, when we become more developed, then we tend to outsource our management of different issues to the non-church people like myself. Okay, now I'm not belittling myself as a psychiatrist or my colleagues like counselors and psychologists. I think there is a model of the church working together. For many years, my wife and I used to go to the Far East, and we used to teach in home churches. And the house churches there, they are actually full of mental health problems, people with mental health problems. And why do they go to the home churches in the Far East? Because the society there is such that it's not well equipped, and church is the one place where they are supposed to find love and acceptance. And I think we can actually do that as well, no matter how developed or underdeveloped our society is. And I think the church then has to take up the mantle once again. Now, what I have to share with you is actually a very condensed form of what I've written about in the book. And so I hope that if you want to know a bit further, you can actually get purchase a copy of the book as well. So let me define then what mental health is. Oh, I just discovered that I can actually look up rather than look back. That's why men, we are not able to multitask, okay? We are kind of like, I didn't know that there's one there. Okay, so I can read, right? So what is mental health? So the World Health Organizations define mental health as a state of well-being, right, in which every individual. Now, today in this hall, we probably have, I don't know, 100, 110, 120 and people. So it means that every one of us who are in this sanctuary here today, right, we should have a state of well-being. Now, this is according to the World Health Organizations, in which every one of us can realize our own individual potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to contribute to his or her own community. If I can read it again, mental health is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope productively, and is able to contribute to his or her own community. So, if we continue on, I just want to extract it and say that there are 4 things, according to the World Health Organizations, we are supposed to realize our potential. Now, as Christians, we believe that we don't come about in a random fashion, that God has actually fashioned us in such a way that we are wonderfully and fearfully made. And even before we are born, God already has a plan for us. God has a plan for you. God has a plan for me. Your plan is different from my plan, and God has put that seed of potential in each and every one of us. And we are supposed to be able to realize that potential as God has designed it to be. Now, the World Health Organization also say that mental health is also the ability, right, to withstand stresses in life. In Sydney, I run an online emotional resilience group for young people. And I define emotional resilience as being like a rubber band. So when a rubber band is stretched and stretched, it still remains elastic if it is a good rubber band and it doesn't snap. And if it is a good rubber band, when you unstretch the rubber band, it would just bounce back to its original position. And that is what resilience is. So which means that on a daily basis or regularly, every one of us live a life of different stresses. So when the stress is over, every one of us, if we are truly resilient, then we are supposed to be able to snap back without any distortion, like a good rubber band. Now, what do I mean by distortion? So if we are not resilient enough, when the stretching is over, when the stress is over, then we get distorted in our thinking. We get distorted in our emotion. We get distorted in our behavior. And the distortion of our emotion, the distortion of our thinking, and the distortion of our behavior manifest as mental health problems. A very severe case of a distortion in thinking might be somebody who suffers from delusions or psychosis. A less severe form, but equally serious, would be somebody who constantly have depressive thoughts, or somebody who constantly have anxious thoughts, thoughts that I can't cope, that I'm going to break. And distortion in behavior might be behavior of addiction, behavior of violence, behavior of anger. So we are supposed to be such that if we are mentally healthy, that we are resilient to all the stresses in life, so that when the stress is over, then we can actually function without being distorted in our emotions, in our behavior, and in our thinking. Now, this might be a good time to kind of sit back a bit and reflect and say, do I have enough resilience in life? Or do I don't have sufficient resilience? And I hope that that reflection would help us to go one step further and think about the state of our mental health. One of the reasons why I've written the book is that I'm actually impressed by God that there are lots of things in the Bible about mental health. And I don't think that they are properly explored. I think there are lots of things within the Christian spirituality that is not explored in the Bible. Now, when Jesus came, our Lord came, I don't think he mentioned about mental health. But then when you look at his teaching, there is a lot about mental health. Take, for example, Matthew 6:33, right? We often quote that when it says that, seek ye first the kingdom of God, right, and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you, and do not be anxious about tomorrow, for today there is enough anxiety of his own. So what did the Lord mean by that? The Lord actually means that we have to learn to live in the moment. We have to live in the moment. That is for good mental health. We know about the Beatitudes, about how we should conduct our daily life. When you look at the Beatitude and then you think about mental health, once again, you would find that what the Lord actually has to say on the Mount of Olives is actually very good for our mental health. Or take, for example, the Lord's Prayer. Some of us are so used to the Lord's Prayer that perhaps we don't take time to ponder on that, right? When the Lord says, when you pray, this is how you should pray. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth. It is in heaven, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. A good mental health is one that is kingdom-oriented. A good mental health is one where we know that there's our Father in heaven. He's not just a God that is far away, but He is our Father. Mental health begins with God, our Abba Father, and mental health ends with God, our Abba Father. In the Lord's Prayer, there's forgiveness. In the Lord's Prayer, there's an element of existing and living our life out of the grace of God. That's why we say, give us this day our daily bread. It is out of the abundance of God's grace that we live our life. And it talks about forgiveness as well. It talks about dependency on God the Father. So there is a lot that the Bible has to teach us about mental health, even though, if you look through, I'm sure what I say is correct, that if you look through, there's no such word as mental health in the Bible. And there's a lot about mental health. So it is also the idea of our productivity. Now that is very important as well, because God has made us to be productive, and the element of being a part of the community, that we contribute to our community. So those are the four things that the World Health Organization talks about in terms of the definition of mental health. So I want to put it in another way. Mental health is not about the absence of disease. We know that of physical health, and the same apply for mental health. You can't say that, oh look, I'm physically healthy just because the doctors say that I don't actually have ischemic heart disease, or I don't have hypertension, or I don't have liver disease, right? Health is different from the absence of disease, because the Lord has made it in such a way that our body is so wonderful, our psyche is so wonderful. By the time we have a problem, it is usually that our health itself has been compromised many, many times. And in psychiatry and psychology, we talk about disorder. So mental health is not the absence of disorder. And mental health doesn't mean that you have never seen a counselor. And mental health, above all, is not the fact that you haven't seen a psychiatrist. You have seen one today, so you can't claim that. So, mental health is not any of those things. Just because you don't have a problem, just because you don't have a diagnosis of disease or disorder, just because you haven't seen a counselor, or just because you haven't seen a psychiatrist, that doesn't mean that you don't have mental health problems. So, mental health, right, it's got to do with our sense of a loss of connectedness, a loss of meaning, and security. Now, I just want to go back to the scripture a bit in order to address this whole issues about why mental health problems is or are on the increase. When you look at Genesis 1 and 2, and a lot of us know about this account, it talks about the universe that has been called into existence, not out of randomness, but out of the will of God. And we know that it says, in the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created. So he created out of his purpose and out of his counsel and out of his wisdom. And when you look at Genesis 1 and 2, you find that there are a number of things that stand out. The first one, of course, is that there's a meaning to the universe. It is not random. It didn't actually come out of creation, out of a soup of randomness just because some protons or electrons or molecules get into that soup, and then after that there's a genesis of life. But it is a meaningful, purposeful counsel of God. So, according to Christian spirituality, there is meaning in the creation. And out of Genesis 1 and 2, we also know that there is a sense of connectedness. Now, that is very, very important as well. So, God didn't create man and after that leave man to fend for. To be politically correct, I have to say God created people, okay? But you know what I mean when I say men, okay? It's people, men and women. So God didn't create us and then leave us alone. So there's no randomness. God actually created us, and there is a sense of connectedness. You read in Genesis chapter 2, right? And of how after the event of the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. When they heard the footstep of God, in the cool of the evening, walking in the garden, they became fearful. When you read that, it gives you the impression that there is a usual things that God did at that time. So it's not like God actually visited them. There seems to be a regular connection, a regular communion, a regular sort of checking in, a regular sort of coming by, right, to talk to Adam and Eve, and maybe in the way of, hey, how are you doing this today? And how is work for you, you know? Do you enjoy yourself? And can you tell me something about your day, right? So there is connectedness. And also there is security. They were not fearful. When you read Genesis 1 and 2, and after they ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, that was the first time they felt fear. So, when you look at Genesis 1 and 2, you find that there's connectedness, there's meaning, and there is security. So, if you flip it over, as a result of the fall, there's disconnectedness, there's loss of meaning, and there is insecurity. Now, I just want us to hold those three concepts together and then ponder on why there is an increase in mental health problems during these days. I postulated that there are a number of events that happens in these generations which cause an increase in mental health problems. I wrote in the book that most of us, psychiatrists and psychologists, feel that there is actually an increase in mental health problems. take for example, we know that there has been an increase in mental health problems among the young, adolescents and young people. And when you look at recent events, it seems to coincide with the rise of technology and social media. It's just mind-boggling, and I'm sure it happens here in Malaysia as well as Singapore. But in the West, there's a lot of young people with mental health issues as a result of technology, as a result of social media. There is bullying online, what we call cyberbullying. There's alienations, okay? So all the events that I'm going to share with you in a little while highlight this point that when we have a sense of disconnectedness, when we have a loss of meaning, when we have a sense of insecurity, then there is mental health issues. So number one is actually the increase in technology. The increase in technology has not actually helped to connect us. The increase in technology actually helps to alienate us from one to the other person. These days, we don't actually talk to people very much anymore. These days, we meet online, and there's the advantages of being online. These days, we can do Zoom meetings and have teaching online, but there's nothing like meeting face to face. There's nothing like being next to each other. There's nothing like looking at a person's emotional expression. There's nothing like feeling the tone of another person. There's nothing like giving the person a hug. And it is really hard to empathize with a person when you just meet online. And half the time too, sometimes when you meet online, you have all those wonderful emojis. I'm still trying to work out. The other day, a Christian brother wrote to me, and then there's an emoji of, I think it's half the face and with like that. Then I thought, oh, what is that? Is he trying to be kind of like having me on and being funny? And then when I looked up the Wikipedia, and I found that it means salute or honor. And so you have all sorts of emoji. These days you can have emoji, you have an icon, and then you have the GIF, right? Is it GIF? And sometimes, because I'm not very good at this, then I have to look through and say, oh, maybe this is the one that I should do, right? So we don't say it anymore. We put it through all these emoji. The rise of technology actually gives us a sense of disconnectedness, globalization. Globalization, where every one of us is supposed to live in a global village, it doesn't actually connect us. Globalization actually alienates us. In Sydney, Australia, I see a lot of young people, and a lot of them, where I live, they actually come from families with high-powered parents. And the high-powered parents probably spend 6 months of the year somewhere else, okay, flying in and out. And a lot of times, the kids don't actually feel the presence of the person. So globalization actually alienates us. In Australia, where I work, there are lots of migrant kids from the Asian countries, and we say that they have parents, astronaut parents. They fly in and out of Sydney in order to maintain the work in their home country, and then also have the kids in Sydney. So globalization doesn't actually help. The other one that doesn't actually help is this whole thing about climate change. Now, I'm not here to get into the camp of saying whether there is or there's no climate change, but nevertheless, it actually increased a lot of anxiety of young people. And I have young people who think that, look, they are not going to live beyond the age of 30 or whatever, because they are pretty sure that by then the world would actually come to an end. So the climate change actually increased anxiety in the young people. The other one, which I have to mention, is COVID. As a result of COVID, there are lots of mental health issues. The isolation, the social distancing, and also the separation of family members. And who knows, right, what is actually going to be the ramification long term. We know that a lot of young kids who were born during the time of the COVID, they are not so good in terms of their social development. I'm talking about very young kids, because they don't, you can't see the facial expression of the other person. The face is very important. I'm going to talk about that in the third session, and also tomorrow in this sanctuary here, to have this privilege of talking about that. So the pandemic itself has actually engendered a lot of fear in people. These days, in my surgery, when I sneeze, when I have a runny nose, when I have a cough, I usually have to apologize to my patient and say, oh, by the way, I don't have COVID, okay? And I don't feel, and I have to say that because I don't want people to sort of get anxious. And on public transport, I'm not too sure about Malaysia, but in Sydney, right? Because in Sydney we have train and we have buses. So when somebody sneezes on the train, you kind of, oh, who's that person? So it has actually engendered a lot of fear in a lot of us. And the other one is wars and rumors of wars, especially the last few years. And the Russian-Ukraine crisis. And again, I don't want to buy into, I'm not talking about the analysis of who is right and wrong, but I think it has increased a lot of angst in a lot of us. And for those of you who live in the Southeast Asia, for those of you who are the Asian, you share this part of the geography. There's constant talk about the tension in the South China Sea and the Indo-Pacific region, and all these things actually cause a lot of fear in people. And I think Christians are no exceptions. Christians are no exceptions. So when the Russian-Ukraine crisis broke up, a lot of us buy into different camps of what is going on. Maybe it's the end of the world, and some of us get very anxious about that. Others of us then have a sense that, look, when the final curtain falls, then we may not be here, and God is still in charge. And God is indeed in charge. And I'm not saying that He's not, but I'm saying that all these things increase our fear. And yet Jesus says that we should not fear. But when we experience all these things, then there is an increase in mental health issues. Personally, this is my conviction that I want to share with you, but you may not agree with me. I just feel that mental health issues will continue to rise. Why do I say that? I say that is because I believe that whatever that is happening in the world now, there's great shifts in geopolitics, and it doesn't matter how you look at it. I told my kids, and I say, look, it looks as though I'm going to retire in a different sort of time of a world, and my grandchildren are going to grow up. Now that is if, Christ still hasn't come back. My grandchildren are going to grow up in a very different world. So whenever there are changes, people have to adapt. And when you can't adapt, then we have mental health issues. So the world is going to be quite different. And I think as a church and as Christians, we've got to get ready for that it is going to be a very different world that we are going to live in, that we're going to confront. So, changes which threaten our sense of connectedness, meaning in life, and increase our feeling of insecurity, generally have a negative impact on our mental health. And when we consider that, no wonder there's such an increase in mental health issues recently. And I just feel that it is just going to be getting a bit more, I think it's going to get a bit worse, and I think it's just going to get a bit more serious. And I think as Christians, we have to be aware of that. And as Christians, we have to be aware. And as a church then, we have to be aware. And I think as a church, as a healing community, where we are supposed to relate in that connected sort of way, that we are supposed to help one another. One of the things that I talk about in Christian spirituality is this. I think Christian spirituality is one where we express life in a community. There are a number of things that are very different when we talk about, when we look at spirituality, Christian spirituality, but one of the important things is that we express our spirituality through living life together. And I have to say that it is a sad thing indeed that post-COVID, and I'm pretty sure that it would be the same phenomenon here in Malaysia and Singapore as in like the Western world, a lot of churches have closed down. There are a number of things that happen as a result of COVID. A lot of churches have closed down. A lot of us, I use the word us, and have not returned to the church. A lot of us have been so disillusioned that we left our faith. And a lot of us has become what I call smorgasbord Christians. Smorgasbord Christian would be, today is Sunday, I usually go to church at 9 a.m. So which church should I go to online? Do I come to FGA ITAM online because they have a Zoom thing going on? Or do I go to another place somewhere in America? And I don't think we can do life like that. I think we have to express our spirituality to community because that's how God has actually made us.